In the early 1950s, Ingmar Bergman began to document his filmmaking with a small Bell & Howell movie camera. At first, he did the on-set shooting himself, but later left it to various crew members. Such is the case with this tape from Persona, with footage both from the Rosunda studio in Stockholm and from Fårö, the small island in the Baltic. The shooting of Persona began under problematic circumstances. In the spring of 1965, Bergman had been hospitalized with a virus that affected his sense of balance. He doubted his ability to tackle his new film project. In his workbook to Persona, he wrote, "I worry that the whole thing will be a goddamn fiasco and that I have forgotten the art of filmmaking." He began the shooting of Persona with a hospital scene. The doctor, appearing in a white medical frock, was acted by Margareta Krook, a leading actress at Sweden's National Theatre. As head of Dramaten at the time, Bergman knew Krook professionally, though she never became a regular member of his famous stable of actors. According to Bergman, the hospital sequence was a disaster. The very beginning with Margareta, he wrote, was not very happy. All the time we got only bad results. Bibi got angry and Liv got nervous. Bergman was falling in love with Liv Ullmann, a Norwegian actress who was to make her Bergman debut in Persona. Ullmann's and Bergman's rapport is noticeable in this tête-à-tête, intercepted by Bergman's prop man, a hunchback called K.A., short for Carl Arne Bergman, no relation to Ingmar. Here Bergman is discussing a scene in a summer house where Elisabeth and Nurse Alma have withdrawn. We catch a glimpse of a crew member adjusting a light and see the makeup assistant, Tina Johansson, briefly talking with Bergman. In this scene, Nurse Alma will overstep her professional assignment and tell her patient about her own personal life. In his workbook to Persona, Bergman suggests that Elisabeth serves as Alma's medium. Nurse Alma, he says, seeks out herself through Mrs. Vogler. Bergman's primary attention here is on Bibi Andersson. She had been part of his cast for more than 15 years. Earlier, Bergman had portrayed her as a sweet young girl. In Persona, he recognized her real potential as an actress by giving her a complex psychological part. Many commentators on Persona have paid most attention to Liv Ullmann's presence in the film, perhaps because at that time she represented a new face in the Bergman canon and was to become his major female star in the future. An additional reason had to do with a private relationship with Bergman, which originated with the shooting of Persona. Bergman himself commented on it. In his book Images, My Life in Film, he wrote, "The film profited, of course, from the strong private feelings set in motion during the shooting. It turned into a happy production." During the shooting of Persona, the American NBC reporter Ed Newman visited on the set. It resulted in an interview program titled A Profile of Ingmar Bergman, which aired on NBC on November 16, 1965. And the version appeared in print in film comment in the fall-winter issue of 1967. Bergman was relatively generous in admitting journalists to visit and interview him during the shooting of a film. But he was a person who demanded full control and was strict about avoiding unexpected interruptions. For that reason, he often assigned a special public relations person to handle all matters surrounding visits to his film productions, and he was a stickler for the choice of photographs released to the press on such occasions. An interview with him was always directed by him and not by the interviewer. In the midst of all the technical paraphernalia to prepare a scene, Bergman also developed remarkable ability to create an imaginary cut-off space for himself and an interviewer. Numerous people who came to interview him over the years likened the experience to being enclosed with him in a bubble, mentally cut off from the studio activity around them. Bergman's aim was to create a mood of mutual confidentiality. He was well prepared and generous with answers to matters that aroused his curiosity or helped promote his current work. Bergman once wrote, "When you are shooting a film, you use everything you've got, every cell in your body. One can sense this in his pacing the studio floor, observing everything that is going on." In shooting the on-set material during his film productions, Bergman was cautious not to reveal anything but pleasant moments in the studio. By the time he shot Persona, he had learned to control most of those temperamental outbursts which in his younger days had given him the epithet the demon director. Instead, he conducted an interview in a relaxed, often high-spirited mood, and he was anxious to convey the same atmosphere to his actors and staff. In fact, his main principle in directing his cast and crew was to alternate moments of intense professional concentration with relaxed breaks filled with laughter, good humor, and joyous fellowship. Contrary to the gloom and doom image of him that spread internationally, based on his serious film stories, Bergman was no morbid person on the set, despite an occasional and much feared outburst of irritation. What we see here is the setup for the most crucial scene in Persona, the doubling of Alma's monologue, when the tension between her and Elizabeth comes to a head. 2 cameras were used, one to the right focusing on Bibi, the other on Liv Ullmann. It seems to be a rehearsal scene, since the 2 actresses are wrapped in towels and neither of them is wearing the black clothes seen in a finished film. We see Bergman consulting his workbook written in longhand with notes, sketchy drawings, and sometimes photographs. He used the workbook as a personal reference together with a regular script. The blonde script girl, Kerstin Berg, is sitting next to Liv Ullmann. Bergman's initial depressed mood when he started shooting Persona in Stockholm seems to have disappeared once the production was moved from the Rosunda studio to Fårö for on-location takes. The White House, seen briefly here in the background, was built specifically for the shooting of Persona on Fårö. After the film was finished, the house was moved a bit inland into a wooded area, since no buildings were allowed on the beach for defense reasons, Fårö being at that time a military reserve. The house was later purchased by the father of a local Fårö woman who was to live there. The outdoor shooting on Fårö took place on the same stretch of shoreline as in Bergman's earlier film Through a Glass Darkly, though the exact location for Persona was some kilometers to the south. A trailer was parked above the beach for staff meetings. Bergman is seen with several members of his crew. The group seems to have gathered to scout the area, led by Bergman and Sven Nykvist, who point out the setting in sweeping gestures. After this, Bergman is discussing a setup with some members of the crew, including his propman K.A., who had worked for him for many years despite his physical handicap. It is said that in Bergman's earlier film, Winter Light, the actor Allan Edwall, who played the crippled church warden Frövik, prepared his role by studying K.A.'s body movements. Once they had settled in on Fårö, Bergman and his crew started retaking practically everything they had shot in Stockholm. They rearranged the hospital set in a local museum, which served as a studio. In the end, more than half of Persona consists of retakes, most of them done on Fårö, but also some after the production team had returned to Stockholm. With a break on his hands, Bergman walks down alone to the water's edge. He always craved moments of solitude, and the ocean often provided a respite for him. In his workbook to Persona, he once wrote, "I am alone here, above this long beach. Ah, to take in the closeness of the sea, its security and its weight." After making Persona, which was his second film shot on Fårö, Bergman purchased land on the island and built a house close to the Persona setting on a spot where he and Liv Ullmann used to meet and where he could overlook the ocean. It became the place where he would feel rooted for the rest of his life. Bergman is buried in the small local cemetery on Fårö. After his death in 2007, Linn Ullmann, his daughter with Liv, lived for a while on the Bergman compound. Together with an appointed board of directors and with the compound protected under new ownership, Lynn helped set up the statutes that today govern the Bergman estate on Fore Foundation. In his resting his eyes on Liv Ullmann, we might see an aspect of the Bergman touch, that is, the creation of a physical and emotional bondage that often tied his actors to him during the shooting and made it difficult for many of them afterwards to accept that the production had a built-in end in itself. He once said that the main thing in directing women was to get hold of a point of view. In his shooting method, there were always long scrutinizing moments when he was quietly studying and contemplating an actor. He had enormous respect and fascination for his performers and strove to establish a unique rapport with them. Sven Nykvist is leaning his arm on the camera while Bergman is playing with some pebbles in his cupped hands. There is a sense of both lethargy and restlessness in this waiting. Later, when a camera is being adjusted, Nykvist appears a bit impatient, slapping his hands against his knees. Yet the scene also conveys Bergman's trust in his crew despite the long waiting. Part of this trust stemmed from his having filmed for a long time with the same circle of people. One such person was Sven Nykvist, who became Bergman's permanent cameraman in the 1960s and actually contributed to an important shift in his filmmaking away from the lyrical landscape of Bergman's former cinematographer Gunnar Fischer towards a starker scenery, utilizing more subtle gray tones. There is an enormous difference between the sharp black and white contrast in Fischer's shooting of, for instance, Isaac Borg's Nightmare in Wild Strawberries and Sven Nykvist's fog-like rendering of the nighttime dream fantasy in Persona when Alma imagines a visit from Elizabeth. Back on the house terrace, actors and crew members prepare the scene where Alma will crouch quietly by the open entrance to the summer house and leave a sharp piece of broken glass on the terrace floor where Elizabeth will walk barefoot. The episode brings on the climactic moment in the film when a celluloid strip begins to burn and breaks. The summer Persona was shot was very warm and offered pleasant breaks for the crew, though Bergman, as always, kept a tight shooting schedule. His crew members, many of whom had worked with him for a long time, usually accepted this, carried along perhaps by his enthusiastic commitment to the film medium, for they themselves came from a long tradition of first-rate craftsmanship in the field. As a team, they formed loyalties almost like members of an old guild. Bergman respected their know-how and liked to refer to himself as a good craftsman. We catch a glimpse of Alma and Elizabeth on the terrace, now wearing identical black clothing in contrast to their light attire in the earlier idyllic mushroom scene when they were on friendly terms. The black clothing suggests a darker mood and also indicates their increased mutual identity. In this segment, Bergman wears a knitted cap instead of his earlier peak cap. Bergman's choice of headgear was always his special signum and a source of irritation to his wife at the time, Gabby Larraty, who had once burned an old beret of his. Dressed in rubber boots and rain gear, Liv and Bibi walk on a stony stretch of the beach with Bergman and Sven Nykvist. The four of them are testing the location for the shot where Elizabeth will use the camera that Liv carries around her neck and snap a photo of us. While the camera is being set up, Bergman shows some photos to Sven Nykvist, Liv, and Bibi. What is exposed on the photos is not shown to us, but it might be the double-faced shot of Elizabeth and Alma. According to a later interview with Bergman, the lab had returned the photo of the fused faces to Fore. This slippery terrain and the uneven stony ground was technically difficult to film. Cameras had to be placed on stands in the shallow water, and a special track built to shoot Liv and Bibi in a scene in which, according to Bergman's comment in his notebook, they were to run bloody fast. He gave the sequence the name The Big Hullabaloo, or Rabaldret. Later he is giving instructions to Bibi. It is a concentrated moment, and as was customary for Bergman, he physically touches his actor while explaining a scene. Later the focus shifts to Liv, but apparently this is a shot at a different time, for Liv is dressed in her earlier black outfit. On a bed next to Liv, a couple lies embracing. The man looks like Gunnar Björnstrand, who plays Elizabeth's husband in the film. Perhaps they are rehearsing the sequence when he believes Alma to be Elizabeth. Near the completion of Persona, Bergman celebrated the occasion by gathering everyone at the camera track that was used to shoot The Big Hullabaloo. In addition to actors and crew, a number of local people are present. They had been employed by Bergman as handyman on the production. He was always very careful to employ local help when he was filming on Fårö. The ceremony is very much directed by Bergman and recorded by members of his crew and by Bibi Andersson. The spoof is perhaps a takeoff on a famous satire by one of Bergman's house gods, August Strindberg, depicting the silly pomp and circumstance in a royal flag-waving inauguration of a new 19th century railroad. In Bergman's spoof, a man in a top hat, suggesting regal formality, is the driver of the camera dolly. An elated Ingmar Bergman is giving a little speech, while Gunnar Björnstrand is waving a small Swedish paper flag. One might recall that train sets and railroad tracks were Bergman's favorite toy, also as an adult. As a child, he had spent summers next to the tracks that his maternal grandfather, a railroad engineer, had helped construct. One can imagine Bergman's triumphant joy when he literally hit the last nail into Persona's constructed camera track. As was always the case with any production by Ingmar Bergman, the completion of it left him downhearted. On September 16, 1965, he wrote, "Persona is by and large finished and leaves me in the deepest depression for several reasons. Today we followed Bibi to her flight to America. Tomorrow Sven and I travel to Zurich, and on Sunday Liv leaves for Oslo and her home there. I myself am prey to my usual painful self-pity. It feels just awful. On Monday starts the endless serial tale at Dramaten. How will I put up with it? Here on the shooting of Persona, I have had the best part of my life. Now it is still immobile."